What prophetically do you see in that whole transition? I mean, there are so many different people that have got all kinds of eschatological views, and yet God has given you some insight on this that can help bring some clarity.
Well, I believe it's the fulfillment of many different biblical prophecies. Shall a nation be born in a day? In Isaiah. Israel was born as a nation in a day. It had its government, it had its army, it had its police force. One day it was not a nation, the next day it was. There's no other nation that has ever come into being like that. And I have become a student of biblical prophecy. I would say there are a tremendous number of prophecies that focus on what's called the end time or the last days. At least half the books in the Bible have some prophetic reference. And I would say all of them assume the presence of the Jewish people in that land as part of the scenery. So those prophecies could not be fulfilled until the Jewish people were restored.
Tell us the experiences that you had following that period of time that then took you out of the land of Israel for a good number of years, actually. I mean, you might have visited, but yeah, as far as residing was concerned.
That's right.
What happened in that transition?
Well, we reluctantly came to the conclusion that there was no future for us at that time in the state of Israel with a Christian children's home, without going into all the complicated relationships between Jews and Christians, bringing up Jewish children to be Christians. And for various reasons, we just saw that we had to leave, which was the hardest decision we made. Well, then the 4 elder girls had left already. I can't describe how that happened. And we were left with 4 younger girls. And Jerusalem by that time was under military government, and no one could leave the city without a permit from the military government. So, and also, the only transportation was provided by the United Nations. Well, one of our girls was an Arab, and she had no documents whatever. And they wouldn't take her on this transportation. They wouldn't accept responsibility for her. So I think I went 3 times, and then they turned me down. Well, then we had a prayer meeting, and this little Arab girl stood up at the end in a very simple language. She said, "Mama, I saw a road, and it was closed, but I saw 2 angels come and open the road." So I said, "I'll go back once more." And when I went back that time, they put a special truck on them. We were the last vessel on the last convoy out of Jerusalem before the fighting started again. So there we were. I mean, we didn't leave Jerusalem by choice, but we felt absolutely we had to.
And you went from there to England?
Yes.
And during your time in England, you became involved with some street ministries and some things. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, have you heard of Speaker's Corner, Marble Arch?
No, I haven't.
You haven't?
I'm sorry.
Well, in those days, it was a meeting place for all sorts of people, and all sorts of people with political views or religious views or whatever would go out and proclaim their views. And you had perfect liberty to say anything, except you couldn't criticize the royal family. So there would be sometimes several hundred people there. Well, I said to Lydia, one thing I'm never going to do is preach there. Well, a few days later, we were walking past, and we saw a group of men behaving very rudely to a girl with long black hair. So I thought, well, what's going on? It was one of our girls. Her name was Ruchama.
One of your adopted daughters?
That's right. And she had started to preach. She had a very limited command of English. I remember her saying once, "You're all too Selfridges," when she wanted to say selfish. Well, as they were pulling her hair, I thought to myself, I can't walk past this as if I'm not involved. So I stepped in the middle of the lot, and I began to tell them what I really thought about them. And I found myself preaching to them. After that, I preached at Speaker's Corner Marble Arch 3 times a week for 8 years. So, I mean, God gets me into situations that I don't even know how I got into them.
So you were a street preacher, I
Yes.
guess, by definition,
Yes,
in that
definitely.
season of life.
And I think it's a very good training for preachers, because you don't have to give a complete sermon. You step in, you say what you've got, and you step back. And so, in a way, you're getting practice in preaching. And also, you don't have a concordance there. You have to have enough of the Word of God in your mind. So I mean, I'm not ashamed. I've been a street preacher for 8 years in Britain. And we saw many people come to the Lord, many.
Now, prior to that, had you been a preacher?
No, not really.
So in some regards, that period of time sort of framed some of the skills of public speaking that have followed on in your life.
I think to work about skills of public speaking in Speaker's Corner is a little too ornate, but anyhow. Yes, I got launched, and I mean, I believe firmly in preaching in the street if it'll reach people today. I mean, I'm not ashamed to declare the gospel wherever it's appropriate.
Mm-hmm. So you would do this 3 times a week.
That's right. Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays.
For an 8-year period of time.
Yeah.
What else did you do during that period of time in order to...
I'd become the pastor of a small congregation.
I see.
So when we'd finished our meetings, we'd say, now if you are interested, you can come to number 77 Westbourne Grove on a number 15 bus, and we'll tell you more. And amazingly, we got people coming almost every week, and many of them got saved.
Now you had...
It was a 10-minute journey on the bus.
Now you had your children with you.
Oh, yes.
When you would be out on the streets?
Some of them, not all of them, but I mean, they all were there sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all very enthusiastic about getting people saved.
What were the ages of the children, approximately,
Well,
when
I
you
got
went to
met,
England?
When I would say the oldest was about 19, and the youngest was about 5.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all in between.
And so you departed in 48 from Israel,
Yes.
and then you were there in England for 8 years, till 56?
That's right, 56, 57.
Where did you go from there?
I went to Kenya in East Africa.
What was the uniqueness of going there? How did that happen?
Well, the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada had a teacher training college in East Africa, and they needed a principal. And they found it difficult to find one. So I heard about it, and they offered the job to me, and I took it. So I was the principal of their college for 5 years, and then I spent another year in Canada after that.
So you ultimately moved to Canada, and where did you reside in Canada?
Well, I was doing what they call, you know these phrases, deputational work. So I traveled right across Canada, from St. John's, Newfoundland to Victoria, BC. And I've seen more of Canada than most Canadians. Well, then I felt my time with the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada was over. So I retired. And in the war, I had met an American soldier, Pentecostal, who had become a friend. And he'd invited me to visit him. He was pastoring a church in Minneapolis.
You went to Minneapolis at that time?
Well, but that was also not an easy journey, because in Africa, we had adopted a 9th girl, a black African girl, who had been found on the floor of an African hut. Her mother had died in giving birth, and there she was. So I better tell you this story a little bit. So they put her in the hospital for 6 months. And then the hospital said, we're not a children's home, you've got to find a place for her. So this black African couple and this European lady wandered all around the area where we lived looking for any family that was white or black or Asian that would take a little girl. And they couldn't find any. No one would take her. But somebody said to her, why don't you go to the princes? They take children. So about 5 o'clock in the evening, this weary little group came, the black couple and the white woman holding a baby, a black baby, in a very dirty towel. That's all she had. And they said, we hear you take children. Would you take this little girl? So I said, that was long ago. We don't do that today. And we're busy with our educational work. Well, they said, we're so tired. Will you let us sit down? So we said, fine. And we gave them some water to drink. And after about half an hour, they got up to go. And this white lady walked past me with the baby in her arms. And as the baby came close to me, she put her hand out like that, as if to say, what are you going to do about me? And I looked at Lydia, who was in the other side of the room, and she was a marvelous woman. She said, give me a week to get a crib and some baby clothes, and you can bring her back. And I mean, she was not young. So that's how we got our 9th.